They were laughing around her, loud, polished, expensive laughter, but not one of them saw her. The bar glowed in soft amber light, glasses clinking, low jazz humming through hidden speakers, and every inch of the room felt curated for people who wanted to be seen, except for one man sitting quietly at the far end, his presence almost invisible unless you were looking for something real. Victoria Hale sat in the center of it all, the CEO everyone whispered about, the woman whose decisions moved markets and whose name opened doors before she even arrived. Yet tonight, none of that seemed to matter, not to her, not in the way it used to. Another round, Ms. Hale? A man beside her asked, his smile too quick, his voice too eager. Only if it impresses you, she replied flatly. A beat, a chuckle, another empty exchange. The bartender wiped the counter slowly, the scent of oak and citrus lingering in the air, while outside, a cold Chicago wind brushed against the windows like a quiet reminder that the world kept moving whether you felt it or not. And then she saw him. Ethan Cole didn't belong in that room, not by any of its unspoken rules. His shirt was clean but worn, his boots carried the dust of long days, and his hands, resting calmly around a simple glass of water, looked like they had built things, fixed things, held on to something that mattered. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't scanning the room. He wasn't trying to be noticed. You're sitting in the wrong section, one of the suited men near her muttered under his breath, glancing toward Ethan with quiet judgment. Victoria didn't respond. She just stood up. The room shifted slightly as she moved, conversations dipping, eyes following, expectation trailing behind her like a shadow. She walked past the velvet-lined seats, past the men who had been trying to impress her all night, past the bartender who straightened instinctively, until she reached the far end where Ethan sat alone. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. He looked up, not startled, not impressed, just present. "It's just a chair," he said. 2 sentences. No performance. She sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music softened, or maybe it just felt that way. "You don't seem like you belong here," she said, testing, measuring. "Neither do you," he replied. "Hey." Pause. The kind that doesn't need filling. Around them, the bar continued its rhythm. Ice dropping into glasses, laughter rising and falling. But something had shifted, something subtle, something no one else could quite name. Victoria glanced at him again, really looked this time, and for the first time that night, she wasn't being evaluated, admired, or calculated. She was simply there, and strangely, that felt heavier than anything she carried into the room. Ethan took a small sip of water, steady, unhurried. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask what she did. He didn't try to turn the moment into something more than it was. And somehow, that made it everything. Because in a room full of people trying to reach her, he was the only one who didn't try at all, and that was exactly why she stayed. Victoria rested her elbow lightly against the bar, her fingers tracing the rim of her untouched glass as she studied the man beside her with quiet precision. "You always drink water in places like this?" she asked, her tone casual but deliberate. "Most places," Ethan replied. "Keeps things simple." "Simple," she repeated, as if testing the word for the first time in years. A man 2 seats down laughed loudly, calling her name, trying to pull her back into the orbit she had just stepped out of. She did not turn. Instead, she leaned slightly closer to Ethan, lowering her voice just enough to make the moment feel separate from everything else. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. It was not arrogance. It was habit. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unchanged, steady like a calm lake that did not reflect anything it did not choose to. "No," he said. A beat passed. "Should I?" She held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, searching for something. Maybe recognition, maybe curiosity, but finding neither. The air between them felt different now, not tense, not awkward, just honest in a way she had not expected. "Most people in this room would say yes," she said. "Then most people in this room are paying attention to the wrong things," he replied. 3 sentences, clean and unforced. The bartender placed a fresh cocktail in front of Victoria without being asked, sliding it gently across the polished wood. She did not touch it. The condensation gathered slowly, a thin line of water tracing down the glass, catching the light. "You are not impressed," she said. "I am not trying to be," Ethan answered. Another pause settled in, softer this time, like the quiet after a question has already been answered. Victoria leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, her posture still elegant, still controlled, but something in her shoulders had relaxed, just a fraction. "What brings you here then?" she asked. "Same thing as everyone else," he said. "A little space." She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "That is funny," she said. "This place is the last place anyone comes for space." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Depends on what you were trying to get away from." The music shifted to a slower rhythm, the low notes of a piano filling the room with something softer, something that did not demand attention, but earned it anyway. Victoria glanced around the bar, at the polished shoes, the tailored suits, the carefully rehearsed smiles, and for a moment, it all felt distant, like a scene she had already watched too many times. "And what are you getting away from?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer right away. He looked down at his glass, then back at her, his eyes calm but carrying something deeper, something lived in. "Noise," he said simply. One word. It landed heavier than anything else that had been said. Victoria blinked once, her expression shifting, the sharp edges of her usual composure softening into something more human, more present. She turned her glass slightly, but still did not drink. Around them, the room continued to perform, but at the far end of the bar, something real had begun to take shape, something that did not need attention to exist, something that, for the first time that night, she did not want to control. Victoria's fingers stilled against the glass as his answer settled between them, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable in its weight. And for a moment she did not look at him. She looked at the reflection of the room in the polished bar top, the blur of lights, the movement, the constant need to be noticed, and she realized how tired she was of all of it. "Noise," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "That is a luxury, you know." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "What is?" "Getting away from it," she said. "Most people spend their lives trying to be heard. And most people are not listening," he replied. A quick exchange, simple, clean, but something underneath it shifted again, like two truths brushing against each other without resistance. Victoria exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a little more, the tension she carried like a second skin beginning to loosen in places she had forgotten existed. "I spend my days in rooms where everyone talks," she said. "Meetings, calls, negotiations, interviews. Everyone has something to say, something to prove, something to take." She paused, her eyes drifting toward the far end of the bar where a group erupted into laughter that sounded rehearsed, almost practiced. But none of it ever feels real. Ethan listened without interrupting, his posture unchanged, his attention steady in a way that did not demand anything in return. "And you?" she asked, turning back to him. "What does your noise look like?" He let out a quiet breath, not heavy, not burdened, just honest. "Bills that do not wait," he said. "A job that starts before sunrise and ends when it decides to." He glanced down at his hands briefly, then back up. "And a little girl who thinks I can fix everything, even when I cannot." Victoria blinked, caught off guard not by the words, but by the way he said them, without complaint, without performance, just fact. "You have a daughter," she said. "8," he replied. "She likes pancakes on Saturdays and believes every problem has a solution if you look at it long enough." A faint smile touched his lips, small but real. Victoria watched it, something in her chest tightening in a way she could not quite name. "And do you?" she asked. "Believe that?" He shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "but I let her think I do." The music softened again, the low hum of conversation blending into the background, as if the room itself was stepping back to give space to something quieter. Victoria turned her glass once more, the ice shifting gently, a soft clink that felt louder than it should have. "I have built companies from nothing," she said slowly. "Closed deals worth more than most people see in a lifetime. I can walk into any room in this city and people stand up." She paused, her voice lowering, losing its edge. "But I do not think I have ever made someone feel safe the way you just described." Ethan did not react immediately. He simply looked at her, not with admiration, not with judgment, just with a kind of steady presence that did not try to change what was in front of him. "You probably have," he said. "You just were not there to see it." She held his gaze, searching again, but this time not for recognition, not for validation, just for something real enough to hold on to. Around them, The bar continued its endless rhythm of movement and sound, but at the far end, where the light was softer and the noise felt distant, two lives from completely different worlds had begun to meet in a place neither of them had planned, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was in a hurry to leave. Victoria let the silence stretch a little longer, not out of discomfort, but because for once it did not need to be filled, and that realization alone felt unfamiliar in a way she could not quite explain. She glanced at Ethan again, studying the way he sat there without shifting, without performing, as if he had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. "You are not curious," she said finally. "About what?" he asked. "About who I am, what I do, why someone like me would sit here instead of over there." She gestured subtly toward the center of the bar where the laughter was louder, sharper, more demanding. Ethan followed her glance for a second, then looked back at her. "You chose this seat," he said. "That tells me more than anything else would." 3 sentences, calm and direct. Victoria blinked once, caught off guard again, not by the words themselves, but by the absence of expectation behind them. "Most people would ask," she said. "Most people are trying to get somewhere," he replied. "I am already where I need to be tonight." The words settled between them, quiet but steady, like something placed carefully on a table instead of thrown into the air. Victoria shifted slightly in her seat, crossing her arms loosely now, not as a shield but as a pause, as if she was letting something sink in deeper than she intended. "And where is that?" she asked. Ethan glanced around the bar, then back at her, his expression unchanged but his voice softer, almost reflective. "Right here," he said, talking to someone who is not pretending to be okay. The sentence landed gently, but it carried weight, the kind that did not demand a reaction but invited one. Victoria inhaled slowly, her eyes holding his for a moment before drifting down to the glass in front of her, the ice now half melted, the drink untouched. "You think I am not okay?" she said, not defensive, just curious. "I think you are tired," he replied. A pause. "There is a difference." The music shifted again, the low rhythm of the piano blending with the soft murmur of voices, but around them, the noise felt further away, like it belonged to another room entirely. Victoria let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but softer, less guarded. "You are either very perceptive," she said, "or very bold." Ethan shook his head slightly. "Neither," he said. "I just listen." The simplicity of it made her smile, not the practiced smile she used in boardrooms or interviews, but something smaller, something real that appeared without permission. She leaned forward slightly now, resting her forearms on the bar, mirroring his posture without realizing it. "Do you always talk like this?" she asked. "Like what?" he said. "Like you are not trying to impress anyone." Ethan considered that for a moment, his eyes drifting briefly to the bartender who was polishing a glass with slow, repetitive movements, then back to her. "I used to," he said. "A long time ago." "What changed?" she asked. He held her gaze, steady as ever, but this time there was something deeper behind it, something that had been lived through, not just observed. "Life got louder," he said, "and I learned that the only way to keep something real was to stop adding to the noise." The sentence lingered, heavier than the ones before it, and for a moment neither of them spoke, not because they had nothing to say, but because what had already been said was enough. Around them, glasses clinked, voices rose and fell, and the night carried on exactly as it always did, but at the far end of the bar, something had shifted again, something quieter, something that did not need attention to matter, and for the first time in a long time, Victoria did not feel the need to return to. The center of the room. Victoria's gaze lingered on Ethan a moment longer, as if she was trying to memorize something she did not fully understand, something she knew she could not recreate once it was gone, and for the first time that evening, she felt something unfamiliar press gently against her chest, not pressure, not anxiety, but a quiet awareness that this moment was not meant to last. "You are not staying long, are you?" she asked. Ethan glanced at the clock above the bar, its soft glow barely noticeable against the dim light. "I never do," he said. "Why?" she pressed, her voice softer now, less guarded, more honest than she intended. He picked up his glass, turning it slightly before setting it back down with the same calm precision. "Mornings come early," he said, "and someone expects pancakes." A faint smile touched his lips again, brief but real. Victoria watched it, something in her expression shifting, The confidence that usually anchored her now giving way to something quieter, something uncertain. "You could stay," she said. It was not an offer filled with charm or persuasion, just a simple statement that carried more meaning than she wanted to admit. Ethan shook his head gently. "That is not how this works," he replied. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means some things are good because they are not stretched too far," he said. 3 sentences, steady, grounded, impossible to argue with. The music swelled slightly in the background, a low saxophone note weaving through the air, while the bartender moved past them with quiet efficiency, refilling glasses that were already half full. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the bar, a subtle shift, but enough to reveal what she did not say out loud. "You are different," she said. "So are you," Ethan answered. A pause followed, longer this time, filled not with tension but with something heavier, something that felt like the edge of a decision neither of them wanted to name. "Most people would have asked for my number by now," she said, her tone light, but her eyes searching. Ethan stood slowly, reaching for his jacket, his movements unhurried, deliberate. "Most people are looking for something they can keep," he said. "I am not," she asked. He met her gaze, steady as ever, but there was something softer there now, something that acknowledged the moment without trying to hold on to it. "I think you are looking for something you cannot buy," he said. The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Victoria did not respond right away. She simply watched him, the noise of the bar fading into the background as if the room itself was stepping back from what was happening at the far end. "And what is that?" she asked finally. Ethan slipped on his jacket, his expression calm, almost reflective. "Peace," he said. One word. Simple. Certain. He reached for his wallet, placing a few bills on the counter even though he had barely touched his drink, then turned slightly toward the exit. Victoria's voice stopped him, softer than before, almost hesitant. "Will I see you again?" she asked. It was the first question she had asked all night that did not sound like a test. Ethan paused, just for a second, his hand resting lightly against the back of the chair. "That depends," he said. "On what?" she asked. He glanced back at her, not with promise, not with distance, just with the same quiet honesty he had carried from the beginning. "On whether you come back for the right reason," he said. And then he walked away, not looking back, not waiting, leaving behind a space that felt suddenly larger than the seat he had occupied. And for the first time that night, Victoria did not move, did not call out, did not return to the center of the room, because something in her knew that if she stood up now, she would only be walking back into the noise she had just escaped. The next night, the bar looked exactly the same, but nothing felt the same. Victoria stepped inside just after 9, the soft amber light washing over her again, the familiar hum of conversation wrapping around the room. But this time she did not pause at the center, did not acknowledge the subtle shift in attention as heads turned and voices lowered when they recognized her. "Ms. Hale, your usual table is ready," the host said quickly, stepping forward with practiced eagerness. "No," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I will sit at the bar." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he nodded anyway. "Of course." She walked past the same polished tables, the same curated laughter, the same people trying just a little too hard to be seen, but her eyes did not linger on any of it. They went straight to the far end. The seat was empty. She stopped for a moment, just a second, as if she expected something to change if she waited long enough, but it did not. The chair remained still, the space untouched, ordinary again in a way that felt almost wrong. She sat down anyway. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked, already reaching for the bottle he assumed she would choose. "Water," she said. He hesitated, just slightly, then nodded and filled a glass, setting it in front of her with a quieter motion than usual. Victoria wrapped her fingers around it, the cool surface grounding, familiar now in a way it had not been the night before. She glanced at the door once, then again, each time a little less obvious, each time a little more deliberate. "You are looking for someone," the bartender said after a while, his tone neutral but observant. "A man," she replied. "He sat here last night." The bartender wiped the counter slowly, thinking. "Brown hair, quiet, did not order much?" "Yes." "He comes in sometimes," the bartender said. "Not every night." A pause. "Usually early. Leaves before it gets busy." Victoria nodded slightly, absorbing that. her eyes drifting back to the empty seat beside her. The room continued to move around her, louder now as the night built, glasses clinking, music rising, laughter spilling over itself in waves, but none of it reached her the same way. Another round. A voice asked from behind her, smooth, familiar, practiced. She did not turn. No, she said. The man lingered for a moment, then walked away, his interest fading as quickly as it had appeared. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her forearms resting against the bar, mirroring a posture she had only held once before, but it felt more natural now, less like a choice and more like a return. He did not ask for anything, she said quietly, almost to herself. The bartender glanced at her. Some people do not, he replied. That is rare in here. She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the glass again, the same small motion, but this time it carried a different weight. He said I should come back for the right reason, she murmured. And what is that, the bartender asked. Victoria did not answer right away. She looked at the door again, then at the empty seat, then down at the reflection of the lights in the glass. The noise swelled around her, louder, brighter, more insistent than ever, but for the first time, she understood what he meant. It was not about finding him. It was about why she was looking. And in that moment, sitting in the same place, holding the same quiet space he had left behind, she realized something she had not allowed herself to admit before. She had not come back for the room, or the reputation, or the attention. She had come back for the silence he carried with him. And he was not there. Victoria remained at the bar longer than she had planned, longer than she ever allowed herself to stay anywhere without purpose. But time felt different when there was nothing to manage, nothing to control, only a quiet question that refused to leave her alone. She finished the water slowly. The last of the ice melted into something softer, less defined, and still he had not walked through the door. He comes early, the bartender had said. She checked the time again, then looked toward the entrance one more time. But the faces that entered were unfamiliar, predictable, each one carrying the same energy she had grown tired of. She stood up, not abruptly, not out of frustration, but with a kind of calm decision that felt more certain than anything she had done all day. If he comes back, she said to the bartender, tell him Victoria was here. The bartender nodded, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes now, a subtle shift as her name settled into place. Victoria Hale, he asked. She paused for half a second, then gave a small nod. That was all it took. The air changed, not dramatically, but enough. The same man who had spoken to her casually before now straightened slightly, his tone adjusting, his posture aligning with the weight of who she was. I will let him know, he said, more carefully this time. Victoria noticed it. Of course she did. She always noticed. And for the first time, it felt disappointing. She turned and walked toward the exit, the heels of her shoes clicking softly against the polished floor, each step pulling her further. Away from the one place she had not wanted to leave. Outside, the night air was cool, the city lights stretching endlessly across the skyline, cars passing in steady streams, life continuing without pause. Her driver stepped out as soon as he saw her, opening the door without a word. Home, Miss Hale, he asked. She hesitated, just for a moment. Her eyes drifted back toward the bar, toward the warm light behind the glass, toward the empty seat she had occupied, and the one beside it that had remained empty all night. Not yet, she said. Drive. The car moved smoothly through the city streets, past buildings she owned, offices she had built, spaces where her name carried weight and authority, but none of it felt the same tonight. None of it felt like enough. She leaned back slightly, her reflection faint in the window beside her, the city lights passing across her face in soft, shifting patterns. You came back for the right reason, she murmured to herself, repeating his words, testing them, understanding them in a way she had not before. It was not about him being there. It was about what he had shown her in his absence. The driver glanced at her briefly through the mirror, but said nothing. Silence filled the car, not awkward, not empty, just present. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise of the city fade into the background. And for the first time in a long time, she did not reach for her phone, did not check her schedule, did not prepare for the next thing. She simply sat there. And somewhere between the passing lights and the quiet hum of the engine, something inside her shifted again, something small but undeniable, something that made one truth clearer than anything else that night. She had not been looking for a man. She had been looking for a feeling. And now that she had found it, she could not pretend it did not exist. Morning came early for Ethan, just like it always did, long before the city found its rhythm, long before the polished floors and quiet conversations of the night before meant anything at all. The small kitchen smelled faintly of butter and coffee, the kind of simple comfort that did not need to impress anyone. "Are you making pancakes?" a small voice asked from the hallway, still heavy with sleep. Ethan glanced over his shoulder and smiled. "That was the deal," he said. "Saturday mornings do not get canceled." His daughter stepped into the kitchen, her hair slightly tangled, her eyes bright despite the early hour, and climbed onto the chair at the table like it was her place in the world. "You look tired," she said, studying him in the honest way only children can. "I am," he admitted, "but not the bad kind." She tilted her head. "There is a good kind of tired?" "Yeah," he said, flipping a pancake carefully, the golden surface catching the light from the window. "The kind that comes from something real." She seemed to accept that without question, swinging her feet lightly under the table as the morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft lines across the worn wood floor. Across the city, Victoria sat in a very different kind of kitchen, one that was quiet in a way that felt empty rather than peaceful. The space was spotless, everything in its place, every surface polished, but there was no warmth in it, no sound except for the faint hum of appliances and the distant noise of traffic far below. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her, the steam fading slowly as she stared at it without seeing it. "You have a full schedule today," her assistant's voice came through the speaker, calm and efficient. "Board meeting at 10, investor call at 1, and the gala tonight has been confirmed." Victoria did not respond right away. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the city stretching endlessly beyond it, a place she controlled, a place she understood, and yet this morning, it felt different, like something had shifted just out of reach. "Cancel the gala," she said finally. There was a pause on the other end. "Cancel," her assistant repeated, surprised but composed. "Yes," Victoria said. "Reschedule the rest." "Of course." The line went quiet again, but the silence that followed was not the same as before. It was intentional now. Chosen. She stood up slowly, walking toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass, the city moving beneath her in steady, predictable patterns. "He comes early," she said quietly, repeating what the bartender had told her, the words settling into something more than just information. Back in the small kitchen, Ethan set a plate of pancakes in front of his daughter, watching as her face lit up in a way that made everything else feel smaller, simpler, manageable. "Best in the world," she declared after the first bite. Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "You say that every week." "Because it is true every week," she replied. He sat down across from her, the chair creaking slightly under his weight, the moment steady, grounded, real. And somewhere across the city, in a space filled with everything money could buy, but nothing that could replace what she had felt the night before, Victoria made a decision that did not come from strategy, or power, or control. It came from something quieter, something honest. She picked up her coat, paused only long enough to glance at the untouched coffee, then walked out, leaving it behind, because for the first time, she was not going where she was expected to be. She was going where she needed to be. The address was not hard to find once she decided to look for it. Not because it was listed anywhere important, but because people who live quietly tend to leave simple traces, and Victoria had spent her entire life learning how to follow patterns others ignored. The car slowed as it turned onto a narrower street, the buildings smaller, the noise softer, the kind of place the city forgot to polish. "You can wait here," she told the driver. He nodded, but she was already stepping out, the morning air cooler here, less filtered, carrying the faint scent of fresh bread from a nearby corner store, and something else, something real. She walked slowly, not because she was unsure, but because for once she did not want to rush the moment before it began. And then she saw him. Ethan stood just outside a modest apartment building, crouched slightly as he adjusted the strap of a small backpack on his daughter's shoulders. "There you go," he said, tightening it just enough. "Not too heavy." "No," she replied, smiling up at him. "I can handle it." "I know you can," he said. 3 simple words, steady, full of something deeper than encouragement. Victoria stopped a few steps away, not interrupting, not announcing herself, just watching the way he spoke to her, the way he knelt to her level, the way nothing about the moment was rushed or distracted. "Do not forget," he added, "you have that spelling test today." "I studied," she said quickly. "Twice." "Then you are already ahead of me," he replied with a small smile. The girl laughed, a light, easy sound that did not try to be anything more than it was. Victoria felt something shift again, something quiet but undeniable, as if the world she knew had been turned down just enough for her to hear something else beneath it. Ethan stood up slowly, brushing his hands together, and that was when he saw her. There was no shock in his expression, no sudden change, just a brief pause, a recognition that settled in without noise. "You came back," he said. "For the right reason," she replied. A pause followed, not awkward, not uncertain, just real. His daughter looked between them, curious but calm. "Are you a friend?" she asked. Victoria hesitated, just for a second, then nodded gently. "I think I would like to be," she said. The girl smiled, satisfied with that answer in the way children often are, then looked back at her father. "I am going to be late," she said. Ethan glanced at the time, then back at Victoria. "Walk safe," he told his daughter. "Always," she replied, turning and heading down the sidewalk, her small steps steady, her backpack bouncing lightly with each one. They watched her for a moment, both of them, until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. The city moved quietly around them, cars passing, a distant horn, the low hum of a morning that had already begun. Victoria stepped a little closer, not into his space, but near enough to be part of the same moment. "You did not come back last night," she said. "I was here," he replied. "Just earlier." She nodded, understanding now, not just the words, but the rhythm of his life, the way it moved on a different clock, one that did not bend for anyone. "I looked for you," she admitted. "I know," he said. A small silence settled between them again, softer than before, more familiar. "And today," he asked, "what are you looking for now?" Victoria held his gaze, not searching this time, not testing, just present. "The same thing," she said, "but I think I finally understand it." He watched her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. As if that was enough, as if nothing else needed to be proven or explained. The city carried on around them, unchanged, unaware, but in that quiet corner of a street that would never make headlines, something settled into place without announcement, without spectacle, just a simple truth that did not need to be spoken out loud. For the first time, she was not trying to be seen. And for the first time, she did not feel invisible either.